Welcome to our podcast, Leading Past Limits. We share lessons learned from the hard-won experience of mission-driven leaders so that you expand your horizons as a leader that places service before self. I'm Kumar Kibble, a leadership coach and the principal at GuideQuest. I've been passionate about developing leaders since graduating from West Point more than 30 years ago, and have led high-performing teams as a military officer, special agent, diplomat, government, and corporate executive. Now I partner with leaders and teams as a coach to help unlock their potential and maximize their impact. In this first season, join me in learning from entrepreneurs, CEOs, Army generals, police chiefs, war heroes, thought leaders, and more. Be sure to subscribe and don't miss out on lessons learned from the real world School of Hard Knocks. Our guest today is Chief Chris Moore. Chris is a principal at the firm Brooks Bawden Moore, where he and his team serve as trusted advisors to law enforcement, public safety, homeland security, and intelligence practitioners and solution providers. He has over 34 years of public safety experience, including assignments as a police officer, firefighter, and emergency medical technician. In 2013, after rising through every rank of the San Jose Police Department, Chris retired as chief of police of the 10th largest city in the United States. His career included service as a White House fellow and counsel to U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno. He was honored as a Fulbright Fellow and studied police accountability at New Scotland Yard and the London School of Economics. Chris is also an attorney and active member of the State Bar of California. Chris, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, Kumar.
So we're going to begin with what motivated you to pursue a career in public safety?
So it started pretty much in high school. I was pretty much athletic and played a lot of different sports. And always enjoyed working outside, working in team settings. And then in the town I grew up on, they had a volunteer fire department, and a couple of my friends were in that, and something that looked very interesting. So got the bug, ended up working a couple seasons as a seasonal and volunteer firefighter, and then went off to do my undergraduate work at Berkeley and recognized that they didn't have a fire department over there. And so I started working as a non-sworn member of the police department. And then that went on to just last another 34 years. But, the reality for me is that if you think about it, I love working outdoors. I love working with people. Law enforcement, public safety is a people business. If you don't like it, you're in the wrong business. And if you're not enjoying yourself, you're doing something wrong. You're always getting paid to do the right thing, which I always thought was intriguing. And you get to see an immediate impact. If there's a reason that I really love this profession is, look, you can write checks, you can be doing administrative work, it's all important. But at the end of the day, if you can positively impact somebody's life and, right then and there and do something good, it's a great sense of satisfaction. That's why I think a lot of police officers and firefighters do what they do.
There's always this friendly competition between like firefighters and police, and you've served in both worlds. Do you find that there's a particular types of personalities that are drawn to one versus the other?
I think both services are, those who occupy those positions are motivated in the public service. Again, you have to be a people person in either one.
Yeah.
Those who work in law enforcement, we tend to get a little more heat because everybody loves a firefighter and not everybody loves law enforcement. I can make all the jokes I want about how, they're asleep in the firehouse while we're out there in the middle of the pouring rain. And I've done that before to give them a hard time. At the end of the day, they're always there to help us and they provide a service. So I think, I think it's harder to be a police officer, certainly today, than it is a firefighter. But I think I honor both for the service they provide.
Yeah, and I'd like to talk about kind of the unique challenges facing police officers today and in the current climate. But what was a top challenge you faced at the beginning of your law enforcement career?
So mine was a little bit different, just because there was a strong family ethic. There's 10 kids in my family, and that everybody was going to go off and graduate, get their undergraduate degrees and do well. I was working full time pretty much since I was 17, 18 years old in the public safety field, and trying to pay for my education and at the same time, get a good quality education. So what it came down to is this: both my undergrad, graduate, and law school, I did while I was working. The challenge is time management and,
Right.
missing out on some of the things I would have otherwise done. But I recognized that in order to lead in these organizations, you really needed some of the credentials that I ended up getting in school. not always popular amongst the rank and file to have somebody, spending all that time at school. But again, learning what you can while you're working, at the same time, you're not sleeping very much, but you're going to school and learning a lot there too. So that was the biggest challenge for me, is time management and getting it all done in the course of a 24-hour day.
Now, it strikes me, though, that you're probably, I would imagine, one of relatively few senior executives in public safety that have a law degree. What was important about the law degree to you?
So the answer to the first part of that, there are actually quite a few folks that went to law school after, being in the profession for a while. And I think we all had the same thing: is that, look, it's going to law school, they teach you how to think basically and how to
Mhm.
react. We're working in a very structured society as far as law enforcement goes, and you want to make sure that you understand the legal aspects, not only in the court process and the prosecution and also on the defense side, but just general knowledge on how to manage people and how to
Yeah,
manage large organizations. So, for as you know, I know of a number of major city chiefs and sheriffs
yeah,
that are lawyers as well. I'll just say this, is that I wanted to do it. It's something I always wanted to do when I was an undergrad. I had a lot of friends that became lawyers, and I said, heck, if they could do it, I know I could do it.
yeah,
So and it's helped. It really is. I wouldn't have been a White House fellow. I wouldn't have been all of these
right.
things had I not had that credential, I don't think.
Was there ever a time that you thought about quitting, where it just felt like too much with family and professional life and all the demands on your time?
No, early on, that's why I always tell folks who are trying to finish school and are working full time, is just get it done. Stay focused, because as kids come along and things like that, it just makes it that much harder. So I'm glad I finished all my schooling earlier on than later on. And
Mhm.
that's my advice to all of those who are in those scenarios: is just stay focused, get it done, and then you'll never have to do it again.
Yeah. Well, what did you believe at the beginning of your career that you feel differently about now?
That's pretty clear. When I started in law enforcement, sort of in the late 70s, early 80s, people respected law enforcement, generally speaking. There's certainly bad apples in any large organization, and law enforcement is no exception. I would say this, though: generally speaking, you put your uniform on every day, you went out to try to do the right thing. People respected that, and you felt that every day that you were out there serving the public. Today, completely different story, as we've talked about earlier. It's really difficult to recruit people today to come into this profession. It's so vital that we do get good people that are still service oriented that come into this. But with what they're facing today, it's really a tragedy. It's difficult. I don't know if I have the answer here. We've got suggestions on how to maintain the ranks, but it's getting harder and harder. So I just that's changed dramatically in the 30, 40 years that I've been in the business.
So, if you were going to put your finger on one or two kind of just macro environmental factors that have shifted the landscape in terms of that shift in respect, I mean, what would you point to?
I don't know if it's any one or two, but a couple of things that directly impact that is social media and
Mhm.
people putting out videos that are taken out of context. Look, use of force, I don't care how justified it is. And there are many times when I've used force, I know I was completely justified. It doesn't look good on television or on
Yeah,
a camera. It just doesn't.
right,
So that said, without some commentary, some background or context, people start to believe that the police are running rampant, just injuring people when they're. A great example is that where we had an officer shoot somebody who had a knife on another person. I mean, that person's life was in jeopardy, and
right,
it's certainly within policy, and yet people are considering an execution. It just doesn't
right,
compute.
right. And I think it also needs to be placed in the context of how many, what is it, millions of encounters that police officers have with the public, each year. I mean,
Every
um,
year. Every
yeah,
year if you think of the number of times each individual officer goes out on the street, and be it just a contact on a car stop or in a coffee shop or for a call for service, it's millions of times. And the number of times where force is actually deployed is minuscule. However,
yeah,
those seem to get the most attention. And there is, now, to be clear here, like, there's a lot of things that have gone on in this country that should not have gone on. And police reform, in my opinion, is warranted. It's necessary. It's desired. It really should happen. The problem we have is that the narrative's been, I think, hijacked somewhat. And look, I put police reform into three different buckets. One is things we should have done, 10, 20 years ago, that some departments across the country have been actively engaged in. And
yeah,
there are some reforms in the second bucket that would be painful for the profession, but probably necessary, and with the right tweaks, we could all live with it, and I think everybody would be better off. And then there's the third bucket where you're seeing today in the discussions right now between the Senate and the House on issues like qualified immunity. Qualified immunity, in my opinion, is one of those bedrock issues that if you're going to get people to come into this profession and try and do the right thing with all the right training, and then something goes south, and they're going to hold them liable to the point, personally liable, where they're going to lose their house, they're going to lose any income they had in their families, they're going to lose their job. Why would somebody want to go out there, do all the right things, and still lose their job and lose their families?
Right.
So anyway, I think there's a compromise coming, but it's tough to see some of these discussions going on.
Yeah. And a little later, I'd like to ask you a little bit about that second bucket and things that you think that would help to advance the profession.
Sure.
But at this point, let me just ask you. So you at the beginning of your career, were there key influencers or mentors that helped you along the way as you progressed?
There were. I was, very fortunate to work in organizations that had really quality leaders. There were sure of folks that didn't do so well, but I tell you, I had the opportunity to learn from some of the best. The one I would highlight as the best and the most important influence in my career was Chief Joseph McNamara. Joe McNamara came out of NYPD, was a captain, went to Harvard, got his PhD, became the chief in Kansas City back in the 70s. I think it's 73. They had an officer-involved shooting literally the first couple of weeks where a young African-American was killed, and he went to the funeral and caused an incredible ruckus in that town. He lasted 3 years there, but he was a man ahead of his times about, concerning community policing and, how police departments should reflect, the community that it serves, all of those things back in the 70s. He came to San Jose in 76, stayed with us for 15 plus years. That's one of the reasons I went to San Jose as Joe McNamara, and was fortunate. His wife and he had asked when he was dying that I actually speak among others to speak at his funeral. And so this is one of those people that don't come along very often in the profession, and they're out there, but there aren't very many of them.
What is it about NYPD as far as an incubator that seems to send out folks throughout the country that go on to serve in significant roles?
So a couple of factors. Number one is pure size. I mean, there's no other department like it. LA, Chicago come close, but they're not. It's just huge numbers where you're going to attract talent from a lot of places, not just in New York City. They're bright. Those who want to learn, those who want to study the profession, rise through the organization. So if you're coming out of the top ranks of the NYPD, you can pretty much go anywhere and do anything in the profession. So some of it's pure numbers, some of it's the leadership of the organization. Again, if you have a good commissioner, somebody who's really worked hard to develop the people underneath them, and I think they do a good job of that, you're likely to get even more good leaders that hopefully still serve the city of New York, but go on to do other great things, if not there, someplace else.
Right. Well, law enforcement's a tough job. We go through a number of trying experiences and demanding circumstances and life or death situations. One of the things that we try to promote at GuideQuest are programs to promote well-being and resiliency. How do you remain resilient during adversity, during tough times?
I've had my share of tough times, both professionally and personally, and the message I send to those who ask me that question is stay focused. If you are clear on your mission, try to leave all of the externalities out, because they're going to be there whether you like it or not. Sometimes it's really bad, and it's very, the high pressure scenarios, either personally, family wise. Stay focused on the mission. And if you do that with good people around you, you'll get through it. You may have a few scars on the backside of it, but I think generally speaking, those who succeed in leadership roles understand you can segregate those things out. You can segment them and say, look, I'll get to those. They're important. You need to take care of yourself. That's absolutely important. Work out, do whatever you need to do to reduce your stress level, but stay focused on the mission. You'll be all right.
Yeah. Well, what was your, you talked about leadership. What was your first formal leadership role in public safety?
So, mind you, I started early, like 17 in the fire department. I had the opportunity to learn from a number of folks, but I became a first-line supervisor, patrol supervisor at age 23, which is really young. And although I'd been around for 5 or 6 years learning from different people how to lead and how not to lead, it was interesting for me at that age to be supervising people twice my age or greater. Okay. And at the same time, and it happens in the military too, with all young officers coming through with very senior enlisted folks, uh, they if you're out there trying to take care of your people and you are, study the profession and you work it competently, you're not going to know everything at a young age. But if you're smart enough to know that piece and seek out the help of others around you, they'll respect you for it. And if you have a good sense of judgment, you'll get accepted fairly quickly, which I was. But I will tell you, at that young age, when it was a little intimidating, not too bad. I actually was pretty comfortable, but I just didn't have the experience that a lot of people had, and they all stepped up when I asked. I asked, look, what do you guys think? And they always came up with good answers, and they appreciated the fact that I asked and didn't assume that I knew everything.
Yeah, you're touching on a really key point. I mean, when I reported into the 82nd Airborne Division as a 21-year-old infantry lieutenant, um, the NCOs had jumped into Panama. They were veterans of a couple combat actions, and it was of humility is kind of the point that kind of comes up is knowing what you don't know, and I asked the NCOs, please, your job is to make me a good lieutenant. help me, not screw it up. Mission first, people always. Help me,
Yep.
help me figure out how to grow into this role.
And obviously they did a great job. And I think they appreciate it. They always do. And
Yeah,
I've talked to a number of folks over the years, and they said, look, they always hated these young lieutenants coming in and thinking that they know everything straight out of the academy or out of their training. And it's just, look, nobody knows everything. You have to ask for help. You can still
right.
lead and ask for help.
Well, let's fast forward real quick because I mean, you served in a very unique role. You indicated that's based on kind of this specialized background you had, also having gotten your law degree. You became counsel to Attorney General Reno. Tell us a little bit about that. What were your responsibilities?
So let's just back up a little bit about the program itself. I was part of the White House Fellows Program, and for those who had not heard of that, it started in 1965 under President Johnson. The idea was, hey, look, this country had a number of great leaders, the Washingtons, the Jeffersons, the Lincolns. Where are they all now? We're a much bigger country now. We have some really smart people, but why are they not serving in government? So the idea of the program was to take people sort of early to mid-career, typically in their early 30s. I was on the older end at 37 at the time. Bring them into government at the highest level, very selective process, and then expose them to that high level of government with working with senior leaders, typically members of the cabinet or the executive office of the president. There are a lot of former military folks that came through, but Colin Powell was a former fellow, and many others in business and government. You go in and you spend your year, then take that experience and go back to your own profession and then grow within the profession and taking those lessons. Some people stay in government, some people stay, obviously in the military. I was very fortunate. I don't know why I was chosen to this day. Here I was a police lieutenant and I happen to be a lawyer, but they have come to, I think I was the fourth or fifth police officer in that point, 35-year history. And, fast forward 20 more years, I think we've had another half dozen come through, including one serving now. It's something about the police officers that they really like because we're not afraid to go in and touch anything.
Yeah.
I will say this though, coming into DOJ, not knowing anything about the federal bureaucracy, it was an eye opener. But it also left me with saying, look, if you can survive this, you can survive anything and go back and do anything. But anyway, with respect to working in the Justice Department, there were 6 staff attorneys working for the Attorney General at that time. And, DOJ is such a huge bureaucracy, and, with lots of component agencies, a lot of Senate confirmed positions that report up through the top leadership. So you get exposed to quite a bit. I had a portfolio to include the Office of Justice Programs, which is all the grant-making authority at DOJ, which back then, pre-9/11, was significant, still significant, but we didn't have DHS back then, so all that grant-making came through there. And then on top of that, I also had the Environmental Natural Resource Division. I had a collateral duty with the Civil Rights Division, particularly with respect to pattern of practice cases and consent decrees as an advisor to the Attorney General. So that was another eye opener coming from California, where law enforcement, which I would argue at the time was much more professional, still is. A lot better policy than some of the other places around this country. I came in thinking that everybody in law enforcement was the same as across the country. That's just not the case, for good or ill. And so anyway, I had the opportunity to work with her every single day and advise her on things great and small. Big incidents similar to basically when we had a young child who was found in Florida Straits coming over from Cuba.
Ellie Gonzalez, right?
and I was sort of on the sidelines for that because it was more of an INS, which was part of DOJ at the time, and the Border Patrol, and all the politics that went into it. I sort of stepped on the sidelines, just kind of watched every day, and offered where I could. But at the end of the day, when it came time to take that child and remove him from his great uncle and bring him back to his dad, I was a law enforcement operation straightforward, and the folks at the federal level executed it very, very well. But I had the opportunity to help plan and assuage some of the concerns that Miss Reno had in light of the fact that she'd been through, obviously, Waco, she'd been through Ruby Ridge and some other things that didn't particularly go well, and wanted some reassurance. And I think we did you can argue whether the decision whether they should or shouldn't take the kid out, that's a different issue. But once the decision is made, to make sure it's done safely, and I think we did. The folks at the Border Patrol did a great job, and everybody that assisted did a great job.
That must have been a high pressure time.
Someday we'll have the opportunity to share the long version of that story.
Yeah.
Great,
Yeah. Okay.
great moments
Okay.
in that.
Well, what was from that assignment? I mean, what was your main takeaway? What were the top lessons learned for you?
A couple things. Number one, just the professionalism of the lawyers and staff at the Department of Justice. It's a huge organization that covers a lot of territory, and as you know, having worked in the federal government, they're dedicated people that they're going out. They're not doing it for the money, because they can make a lot more money, practicing law elsewhere. But they're there. They're very much mission focused, like you talk about, and they wanted to make sure that their work had meaning, and it did. So that was number one. Number two is the vast array of things that DOJ can do to make communities better is amazing, but they can't do everything. There's a lot of check writing going on. I mean, I say that with all due respect,
Right.
but I would much rather be out on the street doing things than writing checks. But if you don't have the checks, you can't do the things. So I complete respect for everybody that is operating in those atmospheres, and those environments every day. So hats off to them.
Yeah. Well, there's always this tension, right, between what is a federal role or involvement, and state and local roles. And you mentioned earlier your oversight over or connection to the consent decrees, which is probably something that's really kind of timely right now. What are your thoughts around the federal interaction with state and local police agencies and consent decrees, and what's good about that? What are things to watch out for about that?
So a couple of notes that some people may not realize, but state policing is a state and local function. It always has been. The federal role in policing is actually fairly small, and their ability to influence that is, historically, has not been particularly great pre 1994 with the Crime Act. Basically, the only way you can control or modify police behavior basically is through the condition of grants, and we're seeing that today play out with a lot of the Justice Policing Act, and sort of what the federal government would like law enforcement to do writ large, and the only levers they really have to do with funding. And there are some jurisdictions that say, look, we just want to take the federal money, and we just don't like the idea of the federal government telling us what to do in our state. And I do understand that, and I do think that it needs to be a state and local responsibility. That said, this is a big country with 18,000 police departments. I happen to work in one, very proud of it, very progressive. A lot of these reforms we've been doing for 20, 25 years, but there are a lot of corners of this country that just haven't gotten there yet. And I think there needs to be some level of oversight. Now, that said, in the crime bill, the statute that allows DOJ to come in and sue police departments, DOJ does not like to sue police departments. I mean, despite what some people say, that's a last resort. What they would like to do is come into departments that are troubled, offer them resources, significant resources, to make changes, systemic changes, to improve their outcomes for better policing in their communities. That's what they try and do. Over the years, some departments have, and some administrations are more prone to use it than others. And I don't weigh in either way on those decisions. I just say that those departments that are in need of help, if they start to resist, there is always the opportunity under federal law to go in and seek to sue the department. And it happened in Los Angeles before they ended up with the consent decree. I mean, people just, this is LAPD, and they didn't think they necessarily, and I'm broad sweeping statements because I know the people are involved and they're all quality people.
Yeah.
But the mindset was, hey, we know what we're doing here, and who's the federal government to come in and tell us otherwise? That said, once they realized that, look, they would probably lose that in court, there are a lot of resources and a lot of good things came to LAPD. I mean, they were already a great department, and they're that much better now. They had great leadership with Bill Bratton and many others that understood that, look, you have to make some changes. We hate change in law enforcement. We
Yeah.
do, but
We hate change just as people, as human beings.
yeah, exactly. But look, when you ask me what do I think of consent decrees, I
Yeah.
think if properly used, they're very, very helpful to helping communities get to where they need to be. You just have to be mindful that that's a last resort. We're hoping that enlightened leadership in law enforcement, and that's been, I will say, not where it needs to be. In the big cities, you typically get better quality, but in the smaller jurisdictions, it's hard to get people with the right experience that have learned the errors and learned the experiences, I should say, what went right, what went wrong with other leaders. So leadership development, to your point, is really important for some of these smaller jurisdictions. So, money provided for that kind of training for leaders to take on the hard situations. They're going to be, if you're a chief, every day is not a good day. Very few days are good days. It's, how do you manage the bad days and bring your department to where it needs to be? So I am not going to say I pro con it. The law exists. It's been used effectively. There have been times when it probably has been overused a little bit and then underused in other times. Some administrations think it's should just not be used. The previous administration just didn't use that statute. And you'll see that this administration, I think, will be a little more proactive, utilizing those tools to help law enforcement. But it's never been about let's punish these cops and these departments. It's about let's make them better so they can serve the public.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you've again seen, your career, the arc of your career has taken you through multiple different, assignments, and you've had a vantage point from different. Well, actually, let me back up for a second, because you studied police accountability at New Scotland Yard through the London School of Economics. Eh, Is there anything from that experience that also informs your take on police organizational reform and how we need to move forward?
So a couple things that I did learn over there. I went over expecting one thing and came away with something completely different. Number one is that, look, our police culture is different. You have to understand that the police officers over there, for the most part, are not armed. They're going out in the community in the true sense of Sir Robert Peel to be peacekeepers. A lot of officers lost their lives because they don't have the ability to necessarily defend themselves like our officers do. So it's a different gun culture, and the community knows that. So they actually do support a lot of their officers because they're taking risks on their behalf. Now that said, without naming names, but these are fairly public, high-profile reports and inquiries done over the UK. Is the investigation of officers that were way over the top. I mean, on administrative violence, is one thing if it's a criminal investigation, but I remember asking the deputy commissioner of the Met, they were doing search warrants. I went with search warrant. I'm just saying they were doing searches of electronic records. They were following cops for administrative violations, and a lot of it, what it came down to, they're getting access to records that our folks couldn't get without a search warrant. And I said, well, who needs to approve these? Do you have a magistrate sign, to do this kinds of investigations on the administrative civil side? And they said, no, why would I do that? And I started to say, well, it's the fourth. And I realized, there's a reason we have in the United States.
Right.
So they give their civil servants over there a lot more leeway than perhaps we do over here. And I won't weigh in on whether it's good or not. I'm just saying
Yeah.
that people are very proud of their police officers over there, as they should be, because they're out there taking huge risks without a whole lot of a safety net.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, so you've served in all these different roles. What has been the most fulfilling assignment of your career?
So I break that down into two different pieces. Number one, the White House Fellowship is, an opportunity of a lifetime. That's sort of the slogan that everybody uses. If you're chosen for that, you get a chance to travel the world and meet with leaders and serve at the highest levels of government. So that clearly, it's hard to beat. That said, on the operational side, about 10 years ago, when I was the deputy chief, assistant chief, and then chief, we needed post 9/11 the need for a nationwide public safety broadband network, which is now known as FirstNet. And I was tasked by the major city chiefs because I knew a little bit more than everybody else. And that's the danger when you know just more than everybody else, you become the expert and you have to deal with this. But the task was to bring police, fire, and EMS, everybody in public safety into one room and develop a consensus plan for getting Congress to allocate large amounts of spectrum worth $20 billion plus $7 billion in cash and get them to allocate that to create this network, which we have today. Was very proud to work with a number of organizations and leaders within those organizations, the International Fire Chiefs, the IACP, the Metro Fire Chiefs, the major city chiefs, major county sheriffs, getting everybody in the same room, getting them on the same page. That was probably the most fulfilling because we actually, after 4 or 5 years of work, was able to get that passed and bring something to fruition that didn't exist before. So again, not something that I had the leadership role just because I was designated in that role. But getting everybody together and then some lifelong friends have come out of it, plus a really important piece of public safety communications capability today was a result of that effort. So that was probably the one.
So that raises a question because I mean I think in any kind of large scale and far-reaching endeavor like that, there's going to be so many different competing interests. And how did you? Because we're talking about building coalitions here to get these things done. What went into partnering with others to build consensus and support around the best path forward?
That's a good question. I mean, part of it comes down to look, in our business, the leadership, there's a lot of egos in the room, and you just have to check your ego, at the door and walk in there and try and find where everybody's common interests are. It's not rocket science, but it really is about relationships. And once people get to realize that you're not trying to do this for any other reason than just get it done, they will follow you. You're
Mhm.
focused, you're respectful, you're bringing in people who are silent. In any group, there's those who have great ideas to contribute, but they keep their mouth shut. So you have to draw them out. But all of those things came together. I'm not going to say seamlessly because there were some great arguments in there. Keeping the coalition together, least common denominator at the same time, making sure that everybody got heard and that the interests were addressed. And at that point, once you're in the right and everybody's on board, get out of the way. I mean, it's hard to say no to public safety when you're up on the hill and everybody's saying the same thing, that it's needed. It's not about some special interest. It's about protecting the American people. So I think relationships matter. And I think my time in DC really helped because I got a chance to meet some senior people in the administration, at that point, 10 years earlier, that had cycled through and they were in new positions, including folks at DOJ and then later on at DHS. People I worked with back then. I mean, I look at Lisa Monaco, who just got confirmed as the DAG, as Deputy
Right.
Attorney General. She was one of those staff attorneys, a young staff attorney for Miss Reno at DOJ, working on, her portfolio was the FBI and the DEA and most of the enforcement components. And she ended up working with Bob Mueller for a number of years, and then over at the NSC and national security, assistant attorney general for national security. So very talented person, perfectly suited for her role today. And it was fun to watch and get to know those and work with those people.
Yeah, you in your response, you were touching on a number of elements of a team building model that I frequently refer to, which is developed by Patrick Lencioni, called Five Dysfunctions of a Team. And he talks about the importance of trust as a foundation. And I'm hear you referring to just these relationships, these trusted relationships that help to kind of lay the groundwork. And then there's, constructive conflict, competitive tension between ideas. I like what you said about making sure everyone is heard, because that's really important in terms of then commitment. Because everyone, even if something doesn't go your way, you've got to feel like your perspective has at least been evaluated, if you're going to ultimately buy into whatever that common outcome is going to be. So I
I,
really appreciate your response. Yeah.
Yeah, that on that one note, and I call this out just because I wasn't thinking of it at the time, but the EMS associations, which historically had not engaged at the level we had been, the police chiefs and the fire chiefs certainly were always vocal on everything, um, and not necessarily on the same page. It was cats and dogs. The EMS folks had so much to contribute during the FirstNet discussions and also the subsequent discussions that we're seeing now on Next Gen 911 and others. They're a really critical part, and I was once you get them started, they'll open up, but you really have to reach out to them and say, look, this
Yeah.
is something that we need to hear. And the people who are involved, and I'll just say one name, Kevin McGinnis, who's represented that community very, very well over the last decade plus. And there are others, Paul Patrick and others, but folks I wouldn't name, they wouldn't be household names, but they certainly had an impact and still do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, for someone like me, I sit here and I admire the big city police chiefs. I mean, just all of the different factors that you have to manage and stakeholders that are part of a process as you lead an organization in a difficult and challenging mission. One of the things that I'm curious about, I mean, what was the selection process like for you to become the chief of the San Jose Police Department?
Let me give you a little bit of context before I tell you exactly what it was. I came in, I was the assistant chief. My predecessor, he's getting ready to retire, and the community had become a little bit disenchanted with some of his decision making and some of his access, and for a variety of reasons. People, he was good, and just he'd been there for a long time, and I think people were getting a little concerned and tired. Anyway, they were having nothing on the scale of today, but there were a lot of protests and whatnot. So I was basically told, "Hey, look, you're the chief, but we're going outside." First time since 1976. So the community wants somebody different. And look, I try not to take it personally. I spent my career there, but I said, I'll do what I need to do. But please know one thing is that when you make me the acting, I've never believed for those who are saying, hey, look, I'm going to be the acting, if you're acting, act, do it, do the job as if you own the job. Do the things that, need to be done and just do that. So the funny thing is I told them they're going to have to tell me no in a process. So I put in for it, even though I told I wasn't going to get it. And the process itself, to your point, was fairly novel back then, but we had 3 panels. First of all, it was very public. It's hard to recruit then and now chiefs from major cities to other cities while you're working, because once you make it known that you're potentially looking at leaving, your
Yeah,
credibility with your troops and with City Hall all goes down the drain.
right,
So it
right.
was always originally thought of, keep the process secret, and then eventually it got out, but you just had to be willing to hold on to as much as you could in case they didn't want you. You could drop out with no consequences. That said, this was very open. Everybody knew who was going to be in there. I have my name in there, my assistant chief, because I told her she needed to be in there just to represent the organization, and a couple of outside candidates. They had 3 panels of 15 people each. One was a law enforcement / government panel. So we had the DA, the public defender's office, the chief probation officer, other major city chiefs come into this thing and evaluate all 4 finalists. And, that would take a couple hours just with that panel of 15. And then there was a panel of 15 from the community that would include all the community-based organizations, as well as some of the other neighborhood associations and the leadership of those across the city. And then you also had, the employees. So you had the unions and other people that might have an interest in the police department. The great thing for me was, I didn't have any expectations because I didn't think I'd get chosen, number one. Number two is I knew every single one of those 45 people. And
Oh,
they knew
wow.
me. And because I'd worked with them for my entire career. They knew what
Hmm.
kind of person I was. They knew where I stood on issues. There was no question that I was really there to help people of all communities. I spent a lot of time primarily on the east side of San Jose, was predominantly Latino, just because those folks needed more help than, quite frankly, other places. Anyway, so I go through that whole process, and I ended up being one of 2 candidates. One was an outside candidate who was an African American. And look, those who read the articles can tell you what happened. So everybody thought that was going to be the person. And then all of a sudden, the community stepped up, and I'm talking all of the community, including the African American leadership, the Latino leadership, said, look, we really wanted somebody else, but I think he's the right person for us because we know him and we trust him. And
Hmm.
so that was, I appreciated that, but that's years of work in a community that you believe in. And, I would have been okay. I could have retired and gone and done something else, but I was really grateful for the opportunity to serve in the chief role.
And technically speaking, though, so you have these 45 people that you know that you have relationships with that are essentially endorsing you. Who is the actual selecting official, and are they just ratifying the decision made by the panels, or can they go with with their own authority?
The vast majority, and it's not the same in every city, certainly, but the vast majority of large cities, certainly in the top 25, top 50, the mayor will make that ultimate choice, usually through a selection process that is either through a commission or a city administrator or something, vetting, making sure the process is there. But it's really about the mayor or whoever the leadership, the chief executive is, who they're most comfortable in, the fit between the chief and the chief executive. And that is absolutely critical.
Hmm.
Because if you don't have a good relationship there, it's never going to work. Now, in our case, there's 2 cities that are really, I think Phoenix may be the third, but San Jose, Dallas, and I believe Phoenix still have all city manager forms of government where
Mm.
the city manager will make that, as the chief executive, will make that recommendation subject to ratification by city council, which is what our case was. So the city manager took the feedback from the community groups and all the selection panels, and then their own interview and then background, and then it was up to the council to determine whether that nomination would be confirmed. And I was unanimously confirmed. And
Mhm.
again, despite all there were people that were not particularly happy that another white guy from San Jose. I mean, look,
Yeah.
it was just tough, but I never viewed it that way. Everybody was trying to make a better community, and it just happened to be me at that time.
What so, you talk about another white guy. Diversity and inclusion obviously is kind of it's always been important. There's been a particular spotlight that has shined on it in recent years. Um, how did you approach diversity, equity, and inclusion at San Jose Police Department when you were chief?
So, look, a lot of the way I operated was informed by Chief McNamara through my entire career. He was a strong and early believer in that you have to have a police force that reflects your community in order to have credibility with your community. So he took great strides taking over a department that was really had racial issues in the 70s and started promoting people, training people, developing people so that they could be qualified. I spare you all the details, but one of the things he did is we used to have a policy where you'd spend a couple years in uniform, and then you go off to some detective bureau assignment, and you'd stay there your entire career. That had two negative, and a lot of departments still do that to this day. The negative impact there is that particularly the younger folks, particularly people of color, don't get the opportunity for specialized assignments, so that when the time comes for promotional ceremonies or processes, they don't have the experience and they're passed over. Joe McNamara came and said, "Look, we're going to every 3 years you're going to rotate your assignments. So even if you're working, a homicide had a 5-year cap, but a lot of the other assignments 3 years, and you had to go back and drive a beat car, which
Hmm.
to me was the only way I knew, but it provided me an opportunity to get lots of different experiences, and everybody else, and so that you'll have a good cadre of qualified people coming up for promotion that from every background, and that really helped. And then from the senior command ranks, again, unless you get that experience coming up through the ranks, you're just not going to be able to ascend to the next rank. So it was really important early on in the department to make sure everybody had an opportunity to get that experience and then compete. And everybody did compete, and it's a good group of folks. When I just me personally, it was critical because the percentage of women in the workforce and law enforcement is really small. It has been for we used to be non-existent, and it's small, and it's still small, but getting better. I always made it a point to involve some of the women officers and sergeants into roles that they typically would not have been not able to do, but just weren't given the opportunity. So I had both my assistant chiefs, both were women. The first one and the second one, both went on to be chiefs elsewhere. Could have been chiefs in San Jose if they had chosen to, but they had opportunities elsewhere. It's really important. It shows the community, number one, that you're looking to be inclusive. You're also getting the perspective of others that you wouldn't get, and it sent a message so that if a young female officer coming through the academy sees the assistant chief, the number two in the department, up there to graduation ceremony, whatever, said there's a path for me to get there.
Right.
Same thing
Right.
with the LGBT folks. One of my assistant chiefs, she happened to be in that community, and she never wanted to highlight it because she didn't feel it was necessary or didn't matter. But I will tell you what, it had an impact on the men and women of that community coming forward.
Mhm.
I was able to host an event with some folks. I say that now. Our current nominee for CBP, Chris Magnus, who's the chief in openly gay and the chief in Richmond at the time. I invited him to come down along with a couple other folks to address my command staff because they didn't believe we had an issue. And it was
Mhm.
really clear to me that we did, that people were afraid to come out, and particularly the male officers. And that just, life's too short to worry about stuff like that. They're all very
Mhm.
talented, qualified cops. To have to hide, their personal lives was really difficult. So anyway, I think we did a couple of things that I wish I'd done more. But again, providing opportunity for people so that they can succeed long term in the department was really important. And I think in my own department, has done a good job, but I think other folks could take that lesson and move it forward.
What are you proudest of in terms of your accomplishment during your tenure as chief?
It's a sad thing to say, but you have to understand that when I took that job, I knew that we were headed into a significant recession. We had a couple thousand employees, 1,409 sworn, budget of, it was $360 million, whatever it was, mostly personnel. I was told, look, you're the biggest department. We're going into a tough time. We're going to have to go through pension reform. So at the same time that my folks were having their pension and mine cut, 10% pay cuts, which really impacted families. There's a lot of husband and wife teams and family members that, that's a double hit. And then we were going to have to lay off over 300 people. And in the history since statehood, where San Jose was the first capital of California in 1850, we'd never laid off a police officer, and we were facing the prospect of laying off 300. And I knew that going in, so this isn't an oh worry me. This is what was the best thing I could do is manage that transition. Those folks that we knew were going to get laid off, literally reached out to chiefs and sheriffs around the countryside to make sure that all of those people got placed if they wanted to stay in the profession, gave them opportunities for secondary employment while they were there as reserves or something so that they could stay in the business until such time as our budget got better, which I knew it would. It always does for Silicon Valley. So I knew going into this that it was going to be a very ugly period of contraction in the department, and keeping everybody focused moving forward, delivering those layoff notices in person to make sure they understood, it was real and it was going to happen. So let's figure out the best way for you and your family. And then, making sure that the administration, that, you're throwing away a lot of money in investment in training. And it's roughly costs about $200,000 to find, to hire, to train, to equip and deploy a police officer. And, when you start laying off hundreds, you're losing millions in investment. And to the extent you can avoid that, I wish we had, because I don't think we needed to lay off all the people that we did and demote people and all those really negative things. We didn't hire for a period of years. That was difficult for us as well, because we knew at some point we were going to have to, and we're facing that shortage. Anyway, there were a lot of negative things coming down the pike, and my role, and I knew it moving forward, was to keep the place together, keep everybody focused on positivity as much as possible, despite all the pay cuts and everything else. And it was not fun. My period, and it's been said before, is you don't pick the time in leadership, the time picks you. And it just happened to be the time I was there. And I think I was part of the reason why I was there is, to get people through that period. And now we're on a better track, but it was not fun.
Was it clear to the rank and file that you were an advocate for them, that was trying to lead them through a tough period of transition, or did you become the face of the policy in the sense that you got blamed, or how did that play out?
I was pretty proactive, and I think and the union knew what was going on. I had regular conversations. They knew, but some of the members who, for whatever reason, are disaffected, they would say, "Hey, look, you're just part of the problem," and they knew that I was advocating for them every day.
Yeah.
Some people wished I'd been a much more vocal and gotten into more confrontations with the mayor, but that was not my role. The mayor knew exactly where I stood. To this day, he knows. And at the end of the day, he's elected. I'm not. Even though I had a great bully pulpit, and if you talk about one of the great things of being a chief in a major city is you have more ability to touch the public than even the politicians do. And I could have used that. It would have been really negative. Probably would have gotten fired, which probably would have been okay too. But look, to answer your question, most of them knew exactly what was going on. It wasn't us at City Hall; it was the mayor. But for me, you try and walk the line to keep them focused on the future, because look, at the end of the day, this thing is going to blow past. There's some damage in the short term, and you just have to get through it. Focus.
Yeah. Well, so you've served as a major city police chief. You've served as a White House fellow. You've had an influential role at the White House, the Department of Justice. You are an influencer in a number of different associations and boards. You discussed your role in FirstNet. What is the most important challenge facing law enforcement today?
So twofold. Number one, I think it's really clear that we have lost the narrative on policing in this country. And some of it's through poor leadership, quite frankly, of some of our police executives, not all of them, but we're painted with a broad brush. So anytime something happens, in even small town America, it's broadcast across the country, and it's paints a broad brush on all of us. That said, all you have to do is look at television and see some of the outcomes that are poor, that probably could have been avoided. And that's why I believe some of these reforms, and talked a little bit about it, some of these things are really overdue. The information gathering and collection and data analysis really will help us sort of isolate problems that are causing a lot of these bad outcomes. So information is one thing. There's also the training component. We clearly do not spend enough, and I'll compare it to your military career. The U.S. military spends a huge amount of money training all of their people from the enlisted ranks all the way through the officer corps, and regularly, and they spend it because it's critical that you have that training. Once you get through the academy, the in-service training is minimal across the country. Some places non-existent. Some places like California is a little bit better than most, but even compared to when I was starting, we don't have the funds to do the training we used to do. So I think it's one of these things where those are all important. Training money, use of force policy, the leadership training I think is really critical. There was a period of time when we had the last police commission in 1968, basically getting better educated officers and providing them opportunities to get their schooling paid for. That's something else I think we should go back to. I missed out on that opportunity, by the way. I really wish it just missed the opportunity for the LE, the Law Enforcement Assistant Program, the LEAP, back in the 70s. But better educated officers, I do believe, will end up in better officers and better outcomes.
What about de-escalation training? I mean, is that something that is feasible? Do you see it making an impact?
Absolutely. No, it's part of that training that needs to happen with our use of force curriculum. It is, and it can't be just, I see a lot of these folks trying to go to virtual reality simulations and things like that. And those are better than what we used to have. But at the end of the day, you need to put officers into stressful situations in training with real situational based scenarios where they can be graded, see how they react under pressure. I tell you, having been through some of those early on, you find yourself surprised at the decisions you make and the things you do and say. But if you do that with an instructor, a positive, constructive instructor, that helps a lot. And let me give you an example, because I think it was on I think it was 60 Minutes, or maybe it was CNN. I think it was CNN, where they had taser training after the death of Floyd with the taser. Was meant to be. The officer clearly thought she was going to shoot him with a taser, and then it ended up being not. So they went. CNN went to Camden, New Jersey, Kansas City, and really went through their training process. And they had an instructor. I don't know who the guy is, but let me tell you something. He explained to the reporter, but also you could see that's what they would do in their normal training, is walk them through scenarios, let them react, and then critique it. And I like, just my hats off to that particular instructor, because that's what you want in instructors, to be able to walk them through, show them what they could have done differently, break it down. And I think we need more of that. We need situational, really validated training, and it could be for folks who are mentally ill. I think that's a huge issue. We've always had that issue with people who are difficult. They have some sort of mental disability, and they're taking on the cops, and it's we end up in a bad outcome, and the families are unhappy. Everybody's unhappy. So I think you're right. De-escalation is going to be a key part of this reform. And then the problem is you have to have the money to do that training too. So you can say you need de-escalation training, but you also have to fund it.
Yeah. Well, let's come up to the current day. Brooks Baden Moore, you're a partner at your firm. What excites you the most about what you do today?
The great thing about our firm is, first of all, we have great people, and we are focused exclusively in the law enforcement, the public safety, the homeland security field. We represent a number of associations, including the Major County Sheriffs of America and the state criminal investigative agencies, their leadership, the National Narcotics Officers. So similar to law enforcement, when you go into work and you never know, you put on a uniform, you go out in the field, you have no idea what you're going to do that day. You just know it's going to be interesting and you're going to have some fun, you hope, and maybe face some danger. But these folks are out there trying to do the right thing, these organizations, and we get to represent them on the Hill. We get to provide our feedback and input on things that they might want to consider as they go forward with their agendas. So we're very pleased to work with those associations, and honored, frankly, to have the input that we do. One good example here, we're in the middle of negotiations, the Senate and the House are, on this police reform bill. And, we are a touch point for a lot of these associations to help guide them in these discussions on what would work and what wouldn't. You talk about those three buckets, what are the things we think we can do? And then it's up to the board of those groups to decide what they want to do, but at least we're able to weigh in on that, which I think is very valuable.
Well, you reminded me. So that second bucket, what are some practical things that need to be done?
So, information collection, again, is stuff that's the first bucket, still, of making sure you get good data. But then it is, okay, let's talk about neck restraints. and no-knock warrants, things like that. And I think we're getting to consensus on that. The number of times that I used a no-knock warrant, or our department did, was in 30 plus years, was minimal. But I will say this: if you're going to go into somebody's residence, there's nothing more dangerous than going in unannounced, armed, ready to take anyone who's on the other side of the door, and you don't know what that is. So they're a hazardous proposition to begin with. And I think in the Breonna Taylor, we had, look, that probably could have been avoided. I just say that. I'm not going to weigh in on what really did happen. I'm just saying that no-knock warrants, I think, have come to their point where that's probably going to be, unless there's some extreme exigency, they're probably not going to be, they'll be pushed in the background. You got issues of other no-knock warrants. You're talking, what was the other one? Of neck restraints. So, people say it's a chokehold. I was never trained in a chokehold. It was always prohibited. It was a carotid restraint. It's a technique used to shut up blood flow to the brain that shouldn't do. If performed correctly, will render the suspect unconscious for a brief period of time, enough to get him in custody, get him handcuffed, and then get him back and make sure they got medical care. But unfortunately, a lot of folks across the country, a lot of officers have used this, and we've had a number of broken hyoid bones and have caused death. So I think, unfortunately, the neck restraints are going to be limited as a result of this. Again, does it change the way we do business? Not necessarily. So it's too bad we will lose a couple tools that we had, but if we unfortunately we're unable to sort of mitigate the downside of the huge downside of it, a lot of deaths. So I think those are things that we're going to lose out on. And some people are pushing back hard. And I think it's like one of these things where, look, if you put in an exigent circumstance that is just, at the end of the day, if you don't do something, this person's going to die anyway, then, maybe there's a scenario where you could use it. But generally speaking, shooting at moving cars is another one. Generally a very, very bad practice that we have, taken out by policy for years, but some folks still allow it. Those things just, you don't want to shoot somebody and then have somebody going down the street with basically an uncontrolled missile. They've been incapacitated.
Yeah. Well, before we end today, I'd like to just get your leadership philosophy, what you would boil down as the key elements to successfully leading. And in your case, you've led a large organization. So I don't know if it differs based on whether it's a small team or a large organization, but what are your key principles for taking charge of a team and leading them towards an objective?
So it goes with anything. And first of all, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, because leadership is a favorite topic of mine. I've studied both academically and in practice, for my entire career, because it's so critical to a successful outcome in any business or endeavor. Know your craft. For those coming up in the organizations, you have to speak with some authority. So you have to study, you have to learn. To our earlier point, you can't know everything. Know what you don't know, and be freely willing to admit that and learn where you can. The other thing is, whether it be a team, an athletic team, a work team, whatever the setting is, get to know your people that you're assigned to. Let them know that you care. Don't be afraid to discipline, or at least move them in a direction where if they're doing something wrong, that you, in a positive way, let them know that there needs to be a change for their benefit and for yours. Where we have failed as organizations is a lot of times is we ignore violations and we let them grow, and then next thing you know, the person gets fired. And if you were to look back forensically, there's an average of 5 to 7 times in police departments where people, the organization was either on notice or should have been on notice of at-risk behavior by the officer. So like I said, know your people, take care of them, give them feedback in a constructive fashion, and then when a mistake is made, own it. As the leader, you own it. Don't be afraid to do that. Now, it may cost you your job when you do that. You just have to be good with that, particularly in a large organization where you don't know everybody. And that's the myth that people have about police chiefs, is that you can change a large organization on a dime. They're like aircraft carriers. You can't. And there will be mistakes made, and you have to apologize to the community. You have to move forward. And some people don't like that, but it's the reality of the situation. So again, take care of people, learn the craft, stay focused. And have some fun, because if you're not having fun doing whatever it is you're doing, life's too short. So make sure you're in tune.
And it'll show. It'll be hard to kind of motivate people around you if having fun can be infectious. In terms of motivating those around you to take charge, to take that hill. So I also like the other point you made about acknowledging the things that you don't know, because I think maybe the 3 most powerful words in an organization can be "I don't know," because it serves as a catalyst for learning, and it signifies that it's okay to be human. because it's in responding to that lack of knowledge and what you do from there that creates an agile and learning, an adaptable organization, especially if you can have a culture that acknowledges that and doesn't punish it.
Yeah, one other piece that I forgot to include in that is truly developing your people so
Mm,
that they can take on these roles. And a lot of folks are afraid that there were some great and talented people I work with, and people would be concerned about them surpassing them on the way up.
mm,
Because if you knew they had the goods and you were sharing information, that might cost you, you know, a job or a future promotion. I always viewed it the other way around. I'd rather have really talented people who are smart, and if they got
yeah,
promoted before me, I was good with that.
yeah,
But I knew I'd have somebody beside me knowing what they were doing. So I always want to make sure that and encourage them to do it. You pay it forward, and then you tell the folks that you help mentor, you need to do this not only for yourself but for the organization. And I think we've developed that culture pretty well in our department.
yeah. Well, Chris, where can our listeners learn more about you and Brooks Bodden Moore?
Well, certainly you can go to our website. It's bbm-dc.com. It's BBM Brooks Bodden Moore -dc.com. And you can reach me if people are interested at all. It's C Moore, all one word, CMOORE at bbm-dc.com. Anyway, we're involved in a lot of different things, so our name comes up occasionally. But if anybody wants to contact us for whatever reason, please feel free to do so.
All right. Well, listen, Chris, thank you for sharing your perspectives developed during, I think, 34 years of public service and continued service, and just for sharing just kind of the insights that you've gained along the way. Deeply appreciate you making your time available to be on the show.
Kumar, thanks for the opportunity. Really
Yeah.
appreciate it.